Now, I've just finished up a lengthy video on the VW GTI. Now it's time for the Golf R. Now you're probably waiting for some type of sarcastic comment how I've had to carry a code reader around with me, or I needed a flatbed on standby, and I'm sorry to disappoint, I've needed neither of those for this car. Now you've seen the exterior montage, and I'm gonna tell you something. When I first saw this in person, I thought, this is supposed to be some type of sports car hatchback? You have to be kidding me. It's so understyled. It just seems so bland. And people will say, well, it's mature, it's grown up. Well, I kind of get that. Namely, if you take a look at the Civic Type R and you go running away, that's one extreme, this is the other. But if you're somebody that likes that understated look, this is definitely gonna tickle your rectum. Now the biggest and most welcome update is the full LED headlamps in the front, which are self-adjusting. They've ditched the xenon bulbs. Next, this has the optional 235 series Continental tires, which are, in my opinion, excellent on here. It gives you great grip and they don't ride like concrete, which I was surprised. Everything else is, you know, standard Golf R stuff. You have this black glossy trim on the lower half of the car, which is gonna be a nightmare to clean, and the quad tip exhausts. Let's take a look at the hatch area. Now my buddy Slade said, you know, my mom wants to go on a date with you. Can you believe that? I said, hey, why not? I'm game. So I picked her up in the Golf R and I said, Mrs. K, how do you like it? She said, well, I'm a little concerned. My ex-husband had an Equinox. It was always in the shop, but it hauled everything I needed. And I said, well, what do you want to put in here? And she said, well, I'm concerned it's not going to haul in my books. I said, baby, where we're going, you're not going to need books. Put her in the passenger seat. She fell asleep in like 3 minutes. Took her to the library and she was utterly shocked at all the space in here. The way the seats folded down, I mean, she couldn't even contain herself. And she's a closet case archaeologist. So there's a lot of stuff I learned that day, let me tell you. All right, the interior space. There's a few schools of thought about this. The first being, I think this is going to hold up extremely well over time in terms of design. In 10 years, you're gonna look back and think, well, this is a classic interior space. The door panel design, the handles, the upper dash, the lower parts, there's just not a lot of gimmicks in here. They didn't throw in yellow or green accents or anything just off the deep end. But at the same time, that's the controversy. It's very monochromatic. It's extremely sterile and devoid of any personality. But again, that's a huge pro to this. It's going to age well. With the exception of the glossy black plastic, I don't get it. I keep talking about this in every video, and I feel like the design departments in these car studios now are just like, oh, what's everybody else doing? Because I can't come up with an original thought anymore. It's just the dumbest material for an interior space. Now back to the good things, the seats. The Golf R gets these extremely supportive leather seats with a high bolster that isn't like cement. You can get in here, they're pretty pliable, and they do hold you in pretty well. And they're not some type of race seat. It's not trying to be a hardcore track seat. It's just a little bit more supportive than a standard one. So when you're whipping it around, you're not sliding all over. Some people may like it, others may not. The driver's seat is electronically adjustable, which is great. The passenger seat is kind of half and half, which is strange to me, but that's what it is. The HVAC controls do not have to, they're not tied to the touchscreen. You can do all your functions without ever touching the touchscreen, which is one of the best designs. The infotainment, much like the GTI, it's the Panasonic derived head unit, and the audio system is Fender, but it's really Panasonic. All of that works extremely well. This is one of the faster infotainments you're ever gonna find. I still don't like the fact that it's so bright, even though it's an IPS panel, which means you have better black levels. And your gauge cluster is also a digital screen in this car, much like the Audis. You can customize it, you can configure it. In the daylight, it looks great, but at night, much like all screens, it's way too bright. You can't dim it down enough. And then I wonder, my biggest question about these screens is, you know, let's say you have this car for 5 or 6 years, and I worked in the tech field around thousands of displays that were on all the time. They either had burn-in issues, or they'd have dead pixels, or strange ghosting problems, or problems with brightness uniformity, and that's something I'm really curious to see how these things hold up over time, and then of course the cost to replace them. Now the interior space as a whole is the same as the GTI I was in, just subtle differences, like the shift knob is no longer a golf ball. It has some type of carbon fiber wrap to it. The armrest, you can't open it. It's locked out from the factory because this is a German import, and why they couldn't have the dealerships do PDIs to take the screws out is beyond me, so that's something you're gonna have to do. But they make up for it in here with so much attention to detail. The flat bottom steering wheel feels great. The door pocket areas are felt or carpet lined, so when you put hard plastics in there, it doesn't rattle around as much. The build quality and fit and finish in here has got to be an 8 out of 10, and that's why you're going to enjoy this car for years to come, and that's why so many people love it so much. And from a non-fanboy perspective, I could see myself owning a car like this and driving it every day. All right, enough of that. Let's head into the shop and take a look at the technical aspects of the Golf R.
Still use those bullshit plastic caps on the fucking lug nuts.
It's here. The Golf R.
So impressed.
You are impressed. This is more of what we saw with the GTI. It's on the MQB platform, which is Volkswagen's bread and butter, everything. Well, not everything, but
It looks like the same thing they've been using for 15 or 20 years.
Yeah, this is how, and I talked about this with the GTI and the Tiguan, this is how they're able to mass produce cars so well. They're basically giant Legos. And when you master this like they have, and like what Toyota's doing now, you can have a car that rides amazing. And the Golf is just a good example of how well you can, if you do it right from the start, this is one of the best riding cars in its segment. And there's not a ton of fancy stuff here either to do it, you know, in terms of materials.
It's basic as hell.
Yeah. With the Golf R, there are some differences.
You got a big sway bar.
You got a bigger sway bar.
Front and rear.
Yep. The suspension has been changed. You have adaptive Monroe dampers made in Spain. And I constantly talk about adaptive dampers being a negative thing for most companies. Not here. They make them worthwhile. Soft, it has a comfort mode. Comfort mode is a true comfort mode. It doesn't ride like shit. It doesn't ride like, oh, okay, comfort mode's hard, and then you go to track mode and it's like beat your...
But it's not the comfort mode. The other day we had a 1995 Lincoln Town Car in. Ooh. That thing was comfort mode.
Yeah, well, okay, it'll never be comfort mode like that, but it's usable. You know, there's a definite difference, which is really nice on the road. For a car that you want to drive more aggressively, you can really use this as a daily driver. The next thing you're going to notice when driving this, Scott, is it has a variable gear ratio steering rack. 2.1 turns lock to lock, and it will go from 9.5 to 14.1 in terms of steering changes. And you definitely notice this in like a parking lot. You're like, holy shit, did this thing turn over quickly? You know, I mean, like it definitely, you know, some cars you don't notice it as much, but this one you definitely do. The next thing that you're going to notice before we get to the back, Scott, is something important. This is completely German made. The other Golfs in North America are made in Mexico, the GTI and all the base ones. The engine is made in Hungary, but the transmission and a total assembly is made in Germany. So if you're somebody that wants a German-made Volkswagen, this is one of those. So that's kind of a pro if you look at it that way. The next thing that you're going to see is much like on the GTI, you have a front-wheel drive Heldex front differential. Now, of course, this is all-wheel drive. That's why you get the Golf R. But Borg-Warner makes the front differential, and it operates almost identically to the GTI. Now, Borg-Warner is a massive OEM, and you see it working on cars all the time. They make everything. They make turbos, they make differentials, they make bearings, they make
transmissions,
everything. Yeah, so they pretty much could probably make a car if they wanted to, but
they're smart enough not
right,
to.
Yeah, exactly. They have bread and butter selling parts to companies that don't want to make their own stuff. All right, the Golf R, one of the primary reasons why you would buy this, and I'm gonna say just straight, I wouldn't even consider the GTI after I drove this, because all the problems that the GTI had with terminal understeer weirdness with the hell decks in the front is solved by having 4 wheels driven. Now, the hell decks in the rear is interesting because it's a electro-hydraulically actuated system using multi-plate clutch. So this is, and the ECU is over here. So the ECU is looking, it's connected to the front half of the car. And when it senses wheel slip in the front, it instantaneously couples this entire setup. This will actuate the hydraulic fluid, slip and unslip the clutches, and it will take 50% of the torque, up to 50% of the torque to the rear. And because those clutches can slip, it can send power to each wheel as you need it, and it will also use the stability control system to brake the innermost wheel to get the whole system working right.
But does it have competition mode?
It doesn't have competition mode, unfortunately, but it has race mode, which you can consider to be competition mode. Now, people talk about, well, how's the stability control? Can you turn it off? And I've tried it with it on and off, and I feel like it's still there, but it has to be, because all of this is electronically controlled via sensors. So even if you turn off stability control, it still needs to get data from the front wheels to the back to understand how to transfer power, to split the power equally to balance the car out. So really, with a system like this, there's no way to just be like, oh, I'm totally analog. And, that's a pro or con depending on who you are. The all-wheel drive system is capable of, like I started to say, decoupling itself. It will run in front-wheel drive mode only, and it will only drive the rear wheels during an event, a cornering event, or a loss of traction. So it is extremely efficient. You don't lose a lot of fuel economy with this, but you have the rear end on tap when you need it.
Sounds like your kind of day.
All right, the last thing to talk about is something simple. This car is 0.2 inches lower than the GTI. Oof. So you're getting extra performance, and there's been some changes to the toe lengths as well. So that is why you are getting extreme performance with the Golf R.
I wouldn't say extreme performance.
Enhanced performance.
Enhanced, yeah.
Yeah. Scott, under the hood, what do we got?
Some TSI R power.
Yep. 2-liter, turbocharged EA888. This has been recycled, reused, except for the Golf R, we have more power and torque because they have completely changed the cylinder head design, including the springs, the pistons, even though that's not really the head, but there's internal changes here. It has...
Oh, when you over-rev it, it will contact the head, so it'll be part of it.
Technically, yeah, okay, good point. It has cooled EGR. It has a different turbocharger, different tuning, obviously, to go with all of that. And this has to be one of the best tuned modern 4-poppers I've driven, where it's really smooth all the time. Perfect idle. Obviously, this is new at 9,000 miles on it. There's no weirdness. There's no hesitation. There's no rev hang. It really, really is great to drive this. Now, let's talk about some of the negative aspects of this motor, Scott. Yeah, you can lift that off for this. It has a different high-pressure fuel pump. In America, I'm not quite sure why, and I need to do more research on this, but we're not getting dual injection motors here. We're still just getting direct injection only. And when I posted that this car was going to be on in a video finally, some of the Patreon said, can you please talk about the
why
bullshit?
Why this thing is a piece of shit?
Yes. Talk about the fine print of that. So I'm going to do that. Volkswagen in recent history has had some problems with quality, and some of it is just in their choice of parts, which we were talking about. This has an electronic water pump, which is a pretty common failure point. The Haldex pumps tend to go out and need to be replaced if you're driving like a maniac. The high-pressure fuel pumps will fail. It has problems with carbon buildup, things like spark plugs failing prematurely, check engine lights for misfires or random misfires, weird stuff that goes on.
We all know why we got random misfires, probably.
Why is that?
Probably carbon issues, and nobody wants to admit it while it's under warranty, so they just say, well, I don't know what it is.
VWs definitely have a major problem with carbon buildup. So all these things together, you wonder, well, why would you consider something like this? And the straight answer is not all of them have a ton of problems. It is highly dependent on which car you get, which is even more scary. Some people will say they've had it forever. They've had stage 20 tunes with 7,000 horsepower and they never had a problem. You know, it's just, you talk to different people, you're going to get a different answer. What I can say is some of the design is questionable. Why they do certain things the way they do is unbelievable, but at the same time, VW has responded with extending the warranty on all these new cars. So you now have 6 years, 72,000 mile warranties, which is a long enough time if you're financing this or leasing it to know, should you get rid of this junk by the time the warranty's up. If you've got it and you're at 6 year mark and you're under that mileage and you don't have any problems, you're probably going to be okay, assuming you do your maintenance, you change the differential oil, you preemptively do the spark plugs, do your carbon cleanup on the valve train. I would definitely say keep it. But if you're having problems right off the bat, like some people do, lease this thing. Don't get stuck with it. And you've had to do work on these. What's the type of shit that you have to deal with?
Nothing. They're bulletproof.
Good answer.
I had to do a turbo on a Tiguan with like some low miles on it. And it was extended warranty, and they tried to deny her because she did her own oil changes. Of course, they made her find all her receipts for the oil and filters that she purchased.
Okay.
So, I mean, it's just like, it's insurance. They want to get out of it. Carbon issues, coils. Well, sometimes, it's the coils, the misfire. No, it's the carbon.
And you have problems. What did you were talking about how some people with the Golf, like it wouldn't start because...
Oh, the coolant. Well, that's just been an ongoing problem for Volkswagens and Audis. The coolant temp sensors take a crap and fool the ECU, and then the car can't start when it's cold. Yesterday, 215 degrees on a cold startup. So luckily it was warm enough out where the car could start, but when those past few cool mornings we had, they couldn't start the car. And usually it's just locked in at a certain temperature.
So that's kind of the reality of some of these things. Every manufacturer has some quirky, weird shit.
Their connectors, like one of your viewers mentioned, God, I mean, even being brand new, it's like, ugh.
Your connectors breaking.
Yeah, you can't do that when it's 5-10 years old. I don't know. I would love to see the specialist unplug them without breaking them.
Oh, the guys that actually design the connectors?
No, I'm the Volkswagen guys. I know they know a trick, and my trick is just put a little screwdriver in there and lever it back just enough, but then you usually end up sometimes snapping the little bar, and then you got to put your screwdriver sideways or pick it. I don't know. I've never figured out a Volkswagen connector.
So this is kind of the weird stuff that you're going to find with these cars. And I mean, we could probably go on for a long time talking about it.
I don't know if this has got that PCV valve shit like the other one had that came in where it's all underneath the freaking intake.
Yeah, it is. It's got a weird PCV system too. I mean, there's just, again, different cars have different quirks and problems. And, that's the thing with this. You just got to be aware of it before you get into it and just do your research. Behind the wheel in the new Golf R. And luckily, I've been in and out of all the competitive vehicles in the past pretty much month, including the GTI. So I have a really good feel for just how this car does against the competition. But more importantly, people are going to wonder, what are the pros and cons of driving a vehicle like this, namely at its price point near $40,000, which is a lot of money. So let's get this out of the way. When you get behind the wheel of the Golf R, you're going to notice immediately, it's much like the GTI, it's pretty much the same deal here. This has to be one of the best street performance cars you're ever going to get into. From solidity, quietness, smoothness, there's this sense that you're not driving some kind of like eco shit box, and that's some of what you're paying a lot of money for. The second thing you're going to notice is the steering. Now, everybody talks about steering and it's almost comical, but because of the variable gear ratio steering, it can go from like ridiculously quick to turn to kind of slower, and it depends on the speed, it depends on the situation and some of your drive modes. And the lock-to-lock turning is so quick. I mean, it's one of the most noticeable things behind the wheel of this car. Now, in terms of the inputs, I kind of talked about the steering. It's really quick. It just feels great for the most part. There's not a lot of feel. You're going to get into inputs like the shifter and the clutch. The shifter and the clutch, most people want to know, is it direct? Can you find the gear that you're looking for? And I feel like it takes some time to get used to the shifter and transmission. It's not really a bad thing. They're so easy to use. And again, I feel like they're set up for somebody that's going to drive this every day. You could go in traffic, and there's a lot of give. There's a lot of forgiveness in the clutch release. It's not an on and off switch. So when you're going from first to second to third, you can always be smooth with this. Now, the penalty there is it feels like it's not connected to anything. This is a straight up video game setup. In fact, like my Fanatec shifter and my clutch pedal feels more real than this car does. And like it always goes into gear. You never have a hard time finding what gear you're going into, but it has absolutely no mechanical connection. It just feels like a hollow piece of plastic. And the clutch just feels like it's really connected to nothing. But the benefit, every shift is smooth. There's no trying to be smooth. You don't have to finesse the clutch like a lot of cars. You don't get awkward or slammy shifts when you're driving hard. This is really more suited and set up to pound around every day. And it feels so good to do that. And obviously you want a performance machine or a performance hatch, and you might be wondering, is this thing too soft? So let's take it on some more curvy roads at higher speeds and see how the suspension and pretty much everything works. Now, when you start to go tear it up on the back roads or wherever you drive, namely on the street, your diversity in mode selection is a godsend. Because when you go from comfort or individual right to race, race mode, even on the street, is really comfortable, namely compared to some of the competition. It's still less firm than the STI RA. It's way less firm than the RS. And it's pretty much right on par with the Type R. I think the drive modes work extremely well. Now, as you can see, when you're tearing it up, one of the biggest things about this car is even when you leave stability control on, it's tuned so well to help you get through the turns. You can tell that the all-wheel drive system here is really, really good. Unlike the GTI, where I would literally understeer off the road and there'd be this delay before the Haldex transferred power, you can sense that it's doing the same exact thing on this car, but instead of kind of cutting the power or kind of feeling this weird jerk in the front, you feel that power go to the back more. And the best part is, it turns. It no longer starts to understeer off the road. And even in tight stuff like this, it's really satisfying when you know you can just push through the turn. It feels like it's gonna understeer, But at the end of the day, it pulls you through the turn with the rear end. And that's why this is way better than the GTI. The biggest takeaway from driving the Golf R, namely on the street now, I can tell you flat out that this vehicle is it's so approachable, it's so accessible. I think to so many people that want to get in here and drive fast, you feel comfortable doing so. Like, unlike the RS where you're just like, man, this thing is just, it's edgy, it's quirky, it's weird. You can't get comfortable. A lot of people can't get comfortable in it. You get immediately comfortable in here and you can drive it fast. The all-wheel drive system works. The manual transmission is really forgiving. The clutch is forgiving. It just feels like anybody could drive this car and really enjoy it every day. And then if you want to go pound around, you could. Now for aggressive driving, I turn off the stability and traction control, and I think really this is only something that you would have to do on a track or autocross because the default stability control system works so well. It's so heavily integrated with the way that the all-wheel drive system works, from the little bit of braking that it does to help get the car to turn in. Obviously, you know, there's a whole bunch of other tricks that it's doing in terms of clutch engagement and disengagement, but I think it starts to interfere with the handling ability when you're at 9 or 10 tenths, and at least you have the ability to kind of disable it, and it doesn't seem like it interferes too much. It doesn't, I mean, you can tell it's there, but it's not as annoying as it was with the GTI. I mean, it's going to understeer at the limit, but it's not an understeer that is totally taking you out of your game. And I'm going to talk about some of that with the final thoughts here. Let's take a look. Final thoughts on the VW Golf R. I'm going to use one word to describe this: duality. And that's kind of what you start to get into in performance cars. Because I did some number crunching, and I typically don't work off charts, but here it is. These are the 4 performance vehicles with the Veloster N excluded, of course, because I haven't driven it. But you take a look at these numbers, and you start to add up what the best car is. And the best car for me is not the best car on this list based on how I rated things like street performance, overall performance, exterior styling. Some of this is subjective, of course. But the Type R on paper and driving should be the best car. I should like it the most, and I would say go buy that. But that's not the case. In fact, one of my favorite cars to drive happens to be the STI RA, even though it's not the best car in this list by a long shot. And that's what happens when you get into vehicles that are designed to appeal to more than just going from point A to point B. And the Golf R is one of those cars. In fact, on the performance side, I don't think it's the best car. But in the usability side, driving it every day, the sense of enjoyment that you get there is pretty much the best thing, and it continues to be one of the best street-driven cars really made in this segment. It's comfortable. The ride quality is great. The adaptive dampers work well. The all-wheel drive system is superb. The manual transmission doesn't have any grinds or weird problems when it's cold or hot. The engine tuning is smooth. Pretty much everything about this car is great, except for the fact that you feel almost nothing emotionally when you drive it at a high level. it doesn't connect to somebody like myself who's more driver oriented. It's not the greatest driver's car, but I would certainly say it's one of the best mixes of all of those things. And that's really the kind of takeaway from this. I wish VW would inject some soul into it. From styling to performance, I wish they had a Golf R Plus or something that was just more raw. But VW has kind of never been like that. And if you are somebody that kind of likes that more sterile, understated approach to a performance machine, this is going to be the car for you, and I'm going to tell you that right now. I hope that helps. Take care.